He stayed silent when he learned of her betrayal. But what he did next left her crying on her knees. If you believe in fair retribution, subscribe. The evening sun sank below the Austin skyline, painting the city's bustling streets in hues of amber. In a quiet suburban home, Jason Clark sat in his home office, surrounded by blueprints and sketches that once sparked his love for architecture. At 38, he was a man who lived for precision, crafting buildings that stood strong against the years. But tonight, his focus wasn't on his designs. It was on Joan, his wife of 10 years, whose warmth no longer brightened their home. Joan, 35, was a marketing strategist with a charisma that could captivate anyone. Her energy had pulled Jason in when they met at a downtown art gallery, her laugh cutting through the crowd like a melody. They built a life together, weekend walks along the Colorado River, late-night chats about their future, vows to face the world as one. But lately, something had changed. Joan's spark had dimmed, replaced by short answers and evenings spent at the office. "Just work," she'd mutter, her gaze slipping past his. Jason wanted to trust her, but doubt crept in, sharp and persistent. Tonight, the house felt hollow, as if it held its breath. Joan had left early for a client dinner, her farewell a quick nod as she hurried out. Jason tried to dive into a new project, a community center he'd been sketching, but his thoughts kept wandering. The silence pressed against him, broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioner and a dog barking down the street. He grabbed a glass of water, hoping to shake the unease, but it lingered like a shadow. Then he noticed it, Joan's phone, forgotten on the kitchen counter. It wasn't like her to leave it. She was always tethered to it, texting clients or brainstorming her next campaign. Jason paused, his hand hovering over the screen. Trust had been their foundation, hadn't it? But the knot in his chest urged him forward. He entered their anniversary, still her passcode, a fleeting comfort, and the screen glowed. A message popped up. From someone named Nate. Can't wait for tomorrow. Just us. Jason's pulse quickened. He opened the thread, his heart hammering as he read. Miss you already, Nate had typed earlier. You make everything better. Joan's replies were brief but warm. Same. Soon. The words stung, each one a crack in the life he thought they shared. Tomorrow? She'd mentioned a work meeting. His finger lingered over another message, but he stopped. He'd seen enough. The truth was already sinking its claws into him. He placed the phone back, his hands unsteady. The kitchen, once alive with their shared dinners and teasing banter, felt foreign now. Memories flooded in, Joan's hand in his at their wedding, her playful smirk when he botched their first homemade pizza. Had it all meant nothing? He wanted to march upstairs, demand the truth, but a colder resolve took root. Anger burned, but clarity cut deeper. If Joan was hiding something, he needed the full picture, not just for himself, but to safeguard everything he'd worked for. Jason retreated to his office, the phone screen still seared in his mind. He opened his laptop and searched for a private investigator, someone who could uncover what he dreaded. His fingers moved with purpose, driven by a need for answers over rashness. He found a contact, Mark, a former cop with solid reviews, and typed, "Need details on my wife's activities. Urgent." It felt like a betrayal to even write it. But wasn't she the one breaking their promises? As he waited for a reply, Jason's eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk, him and Joan at Barton Springs, her head on his shoulder, both beaming. He believed they were unshakable, a partnership that could weather any storm. Now, that photo seemed like a snapshot from another man's life. He turned it face down, unable to meet her gaze. The investigator responded quickly, agreeing to start tomorrow. Jason leaned back, his thoughts a tangle of betrayal and resolve. He didn't want to accept that Joan could do this, but the evidence was there, stark as the lines on his blueprints. Confronting her now would only lead to denials, maybe tears he wasn't ready to face. No, he needed more than her words. He needed proof, irrefutable, solid proof that left no space for lies. Joan's car rolled into the driveway hours later, its headlights piercing the dark. Jason heard the door open, her step soft as she moved through the house. "Hey, I'm home," she called, her tone light, as if all was well. He stayed quiet, his jaw clenched. She peered into his office, her hair slightly tousled, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Still at it?" "Yeah," he replied, keeping his voice steady. "How was dinner?" "Fine. Just work stuff." She lingered for a second, then turned away. "I'm beat. Going to bed." Jason watched her leave, the gap between them wider than ever. He didn't follow. Instead, he sat in the dim light, staring at the empty doorway, the sting of her deception settling over him. Tomorrow, he'd start unraveling her secrets. Tomorrow, he'd learn who Joan had become and what she'd done to their marriage. For now, he let the silence engulf him, knowing it was the last night he'd live with questions unanswered. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Jason's office, but it did little to lift the weight pressing on his chest. He barely slept, Joan's phone messages replaying in his mind like a broken record. Nate's words, just as cut deeper with every recollection. Jason sipped his coffee, the bitterness matching his mood. Joan had left early again, her excuse a vague morning meeting. She'd kissed his cheek, a gesture that felt mechanical, and he'd nodded, hiding the storm brewing inside. He opened his laptop, checking for updates from Mark, the investigator. A new email waited. Initial findings. Call when you're ready. Jason's pulse quickened. He dialed the number, his grip tight on the phone. Mark's voice was calm, professional. Your wife's been meeting someone regularly. A guy named Nate Harper, works at her firm. I've got photos, lunch meetings, a coffee shop near Zilker Park. They're careful, but not careful enough. I'll send what I have. Jason thanked him, his voice steady despite the churn in his stomach. The email arrived moments later, a folder labeled Day 1. He hesitated, then clicked. The first image showed Joan and Nate at a corner table, her hand brushing his as she laughed. Another caught them walking close, her eyes bright in a way Jason hadn't seen in months. The final shot was grainier, Nate's arm around her waist as they left the bar. Each photo was a punch, confirming what he'd feared but wasn't ready to face. He closed the laptop, leaning back in his chair. The house was quiet, but his thoughts roared. How long had this been going on? Had she ever loved him? Or was their life together just a stage she'd grown tired of? Jason's instinct was to call her, to shout, to demand why. But that would only give her a chance to twist the truth. No, he needed a plan, one that would protect him and make her face the consequences of her choices. He called his lawyer, Sarah, a sharp woman who'd handled his business contracts. I need to secure my finances, he said, keeping his tone even. Everything savings, investments, the house. I'm heading toward divorce. Sarah didn't pry, just asked for details and promised to start the process. You're doing the right thing, Jason, she said. This keeps you in control. Control, that's what he needed now, when everything else felt like it was slipping away. By noon, Mark sent another update. Joan and Nate were planning a trip, disguised as a work conference in Houston. They'd booked a hotel, the message read. Separate rooms, but same floor. I'll keep digging. Jason stared at the words, a mix of disgust and resolve settling in. A trip. She lied to his face, smiling as she packed her bags. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. Every step a choice to turn away from him. He walked to the living room, where a photo of their hiking trip to Enchanted Rock sat on the shelf. Joan's grin, his arm around her, it was a moment he'd thought defined them. Now it mocked him. He didn't touch it, just let the memory burn. She'd made her choice, and now he'd make his. He wasn't the type to lash out, to break things or yell. Jason built things, carefully, deliberately. And that's how he'd dismantle this lie. Sarah called back that afternoon. I've set up a separate account for your assets, she said. We'll transfer the joint savings and investments by tomorrow. It's all legal, but she won't see it coming. You sure about this? Jason didn't hesitate. Yes. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about protecting himself, ensuring Joan couldn't walk away with half his life while she built another with someone else. Mark's next email included a schedule, Joan and Nate's meetings, their favorite spots, even a dinner reservation for tonight. Jason scanned the list, his eyes catching on one detail, a party at a friend's house tomorrow, a place Joan loved for its lively crowd. She'd mentioned it casually, saying she'd go if work allowed. Now he knew why. Nate would be there, and so would she, playing the part of the perfect wife while her secret unraveled. Jason stood, pacing the room. The party was his chance, not to scream or fight, but to show her he knew. He'd walk in, calm and certain, and let the truth do the rest. He wasn't sure what he'd say, but it would be final. No begging, no second chances. He'd spent years building a life with her, only to watch her tear it down. Now, he'd lay the foundation for something new without her. As the day faded, Jason sat at his desk, sketching absent-mindedly. The lines were sharp, purposeful, like the decision forming in his mind. Joan would come home soon, her lies trailing behind her. He wouldn't confront her yet. Let her think she was safe, that her double life was hidden. Tomorrow, at that party, he'd step into her world and turn it upside down. For the first time since he'd seen that message, he felt a flicker of power, not anger, but certainty. Whatever happened next, he'd face it on his terms. Joan's key turned in the lock, her voice calling out softly. Jason? You here? He didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch. She'd made her move. Now it was his turn. The bass of the music pulsed through the crowded house, laughter and chatter spilling out onto the lawn. Austin's nightlife was in full swing, but Jason moved through the party like a man untouched by its energy. His eyes scanned the room, past the clinking glasses and dancing lights, searching for her. Joan. He'd spent the day preparing, his lawyer finalizing the transfer of their savings, Mark sending one last batch of photos. Joan and Nate at a cafe that morning, her smile as bright as it was false. Now it was time. He spotted them near the back, tucked by a makeshift bar. Joan wore a dress he'd always loved, her hair catching the glow of string lights. Nate stood close, his hand brushing her arm as they laughed over something Jason couldn't hear. They looked comfortable, unguarded, as if the world belonged to them. The sight twisted something in his chest, not just pain, but a quiet fury. She was his wife, the woman he'd promised forever to, and here she was, building a life that didn't include him. Jason adjusted the folder under his jacket, the weight of the photos grounding him. He'd chosen them carefully, clear shots of Joan and Nate, timestamps proving her lies. No yelling, no scene, just the truth, laid bare for everyone to see. He took a breath, steadying himself, and started toward them. The crowd seemed to part, conversations fading as if the room sensed what was coming. Joan saw him first. Her laugh faltered, her eyes widening as she registered his presence. Jason. Her voice was a mix of surprise and nerves, her hand dropping from Nate's arm. Nate turned, his easy grin vanishing when he saw Jason's face. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken questions. Hey, Jason said, his tone calm, almost conversational. Didn't expect to see me here, did you? He let the words hang, watching Joan's expression shift from confusion to dread. She stepped forward, her smile forced. What's going on? I thought you were working late. Funny, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. I thought you were at a work meeting tomorrow, not planning a trip with him. He nodded toward Nate, who stiffened, his jaw tight. The party's noise seemed to dull, eyes turning their way. Joan's face paled, her lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came out. Jason, please, she started, her voice low, pleading. Let's talk outside. Not here. She reached for his arm, but he stepped back, his calm unshaken. He pulled the folder from his jacket, holding it up just enough for her to see. No need to talk. I already know everything. Nate shifted, his voice sharp. Look, man, you've got the wrong idea. We're just... Don't. Jason cut him off, his eyes never leaving Joan. This isn't about you. It's about her choices. He opened the folder, pulling out a single photo. Joan and Nate at that cafe, her hand on his, their smiles unmistakable. He set it on the bar, deliberate, letting it sit there like a verdict. Gasps rippled through the crowd, whispers spreading fast. Joan's breath hitched, her eyes darting to the photo, then back to him. Where did you get that? Her voice trembled, but Jason didn't flinch. Does it matter? I've got more. Dates, times, places. You didn't cover your tracks as well as you thought. The room felt smaller now, the weight of every stare pressing in. Joan's hands shook as she grabbed the photo, crumpling it slightly. This isn't what it looks like, she said, her words rushing out. It's not. Jason, I swear, I can explain. Explain? He raised an eyebrow, his voice steady but cutting. Explain how you lied to me for months? How you planned a trip with him while I was at home, thinking we could fix things? He set the folder down, more photos spilling out. Nate's arm around her, their heads close at a bar. Each one was a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Nate stepped forward, his face flushed. You're making a scene, man. Let's take this somewhere else. But Jason ignored him, his focus on Joan. She was unraveling, tears welling in her eyes, her confidence gone. Jason, I didn't mean for this, she whispered. I was confused. Confused. He let the word linger, sharp and cold. You made a choice, Joan. Every time you met him, every time you lied, you chose this. He gestured to the photos, then to himself. And now I'm choosing too. I'm done. The crowd was silent now, the music a distant hum. Joan's tears fell, but they didn't move him. He'd spent too many nights wondering what he'd done wrong, blaming himself for her distance. Now, seeing her like this, caught, exposed, he felt a strange relief. Not joy, but freedom. The truth was out, and it wasn't his burden anymore. He turned to leave, but Joan grabbed his sleeve, her voice breaking. "Please, don't do this. We can work it out. I love you." The words hit him, but they rang hollow, like an echo of something long gone. He looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger where his wife used to be. "There's nothing left to work out," he said, pulling free. "You'll hear from my lawyer." He walked away, the folder left behind, its contents scattered for anyone to see. Joan's sobs followed him, but he didn't look back. The night air hit him as he stepped outside, cool and sharp, carrying the promise of something new, something he'd build alone. Joan stood frozen in the wreckage of the party, the crumpled photos still clutched in her hand. The crowd's whispers buzzed around her, but she barely heard them. Her eyes followed Jason's retreating figure until he vanished through the door, leaving her with nothing but the weight of her own choices. The lights, the music, the clinking glasses, all of it felt like a cruel mockery of the life she'd thought she could balance. Nate hovered nearby, his face a mix of panic and guilt, but he said nothing, his silence louder than any excuse. She sank onto a stool, the photo slipping from her fingers. Her chest tightened, each breath a struggle against the reality crashing down. She told herself it wasn't serious with Nate, just a distraction, a spark to fill the emptiness she'd felt at home. Jason had been so consumed with work, hadn't he? Always sketching, always planning, leaving her to carry the weight of their fading connection. But now, staring at the scattered pictures, her smile, Nate's touch, she saw it clearly. She built this trap herself. "Joan?" Nate's voice broke through, hesitant. She looked up, his eyes darting nervously. "Maybe we should go. Talk somewhere else." He reached for her arm, but she pulled away, a flash of anger cutting through her daze. Talk? What was there to say? He'd been part of this, whispering promises she'd wanted to hear, but now he looked like a man ready to run. "No," she said, her voice low, trembling. "You don't get to fix this." She stood, brushing past him, the crowd parting as she moved toward the door. She needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating truth. Outside, the Austin night was cool, the stars sharp against the sky. She leaned against the wall, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. Jason's number stared back at her, but she couldn't call. Not yet. Not after what he'd done. Her mind replayed his words. "You'll hear from my lawyer." Divorce. The word hit like a stone, sinking deeper with every second. She'd known things weren't perfect, but she'd never imagined it ending like this, publicly, brutally, with every lie laid bare. In those photos, how had he gotten them? The thought of someone following her, watching her every move, sent a chill down her spine. Jason hadn't just caught her. He'd planned this, calculated every step to leave her exposed. She dialed Nate instead, her fingers clumsy. It rang once, twice, then went a voicemail. She tried again, same result. A hollow laugh escaped her. Of course. He was already pulling away, leaving her to face the fallout alone. She shoved the phone into her pocket, tears burning her eyes. She'd risked everything for him, for a fleeting thrill, and now she had nothing, no husband, no lover, no ground to stand on. Back inside, the party had moved on, but the photos were gone, scooped up by someone, maybe out of pity. Joan didn't care. She grabbed her purse and left, the drive home a blur of city lights and regret. Their house loomed dark when she arrived, Jason's car nowhere in sight. She stepped inside, the silence deafening. The kitchen counter, where she'd left her phone yesterday, seemed to mock her. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and her world had unraveled. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing. Maybe she could fix this. She'd apologize, explain, tell Jason it was a mistake, that she'd been lost, searching for something she couldn't name. But even as she thought it, the words felt empty. He'd seen too much, known too much. The look in his eyes at the party wasn't just anger, it was finality. He was done, and deep down, she knew she'd pushed him there. Her phone buzzed, and her heart leapt, hoping it was Jason. But it was Sarah, their lawyer, a woman Joan had always liked for her no-nonsense attitude. The message was short: "We need to talk tomorrow." Jason started the process. Joan's stomach dropped. The process. Divorce papers, asset splits, she hadn't even thought that far. She typed a reply, then deleted it. What could she say? Sarah worked for both of them, but Joan knew whose side she'd take now. She wandered to the bedroom, pausing at the mirror. The woman staring back looked older, worn, her eyes red from tears. She'd been so sure she could have it all: Jason's stability, Nate's excitement. Now she saw the cost. She opened her closet, half expecting to find Jason's things gone, but his shirt still hung neatly beside hers. The sight hurt more than she expected. He hadn't left yet, not physically, but he was already gone. Her phone buzzed again, a text from a friend at the party. "You okay?" "Everyone's talking." Joan didn't respond. Let them talk. She'd been the perfect wife to them, the one with the charming husband and the bright career. Now, she was the story, the scandal. She tossed the phone aside, curling up on the bed. Sleep wouldn't come, but she didn't fight it. She lay there, replaying every choice, every lie, until the darkness felt like the only thing she deserved. Across town, Jason sat in a quiet diner, a coffee untouched before him. He'd driven aimlessly after the party, needing distance from the chaos he'd unleashed. The look on Joan's face, shock, then desperation, stayed with him, but it didn't soften his resolve. She'd made her bed, and he'd made sure she'd lie in it. But as the adrenaline faded, a new question crept in. What came next? He'd torn down their life, but building a new one was a blueprint he hadn't drawn yet. For now, he'd wait. The hardest part was over, but the real test was just beginning. The morning sun crept through the diner's blinds, casting long shadows across Jason's untouched coffee. He hadn't gone home after the party, choosing the hum of late-night Austin over the silence of their house. Joan's tear-streaked face lingered in his mind, not as a victory, but as a reminder of what they'd lost. He'd planned every move, Mark's photos, Sarah's paperwork, the moment he'd dropped the truth like a hammer. But now, sitting alone, he felt no triumph, only a strange emptiness where his anger used to be. His phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "Transfers complete. Your assets are secure. Papers ready when you are." He nodded to himself, the words grounding him. He'd moved their savings, their investments, everything they'd built together, into accounts Joan couldn't touch. It was legal, Sarah had assured him, a clean split to protect his future. But as he read the message again, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had he gone too far? He pushed it aside. Joan had chosen this path, not him. He paid for the coffee and drove to a park near Lady Bird Lake, the water glinting under the dawn. He needed clarity before facing her again, if he even would. The party had been his stand, but what came next wasn't scripted. Divorce was certain, but the details, meetings, lawyers, dividing their life, felt like a maze he wasn't ready to navigate. He walked along the trail, the crunch of gravel under his shoes steadying his thoughts. For the first time in months, he wasn't chasing answers. He had them, and they'd set him free. Meanwhile, Joan woke to an empty house, the bed cold beside her. She drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by Jason's voice, the photos, the crowd stares. Her phone lay silent, no calls from him, no text from Nate. She checked it again, hoping for something, anything, but the blank screen mocked her. She dialed Nate's number, her hands trembling. Straight to voicemail, just like last night. A bitter laugh escaped her. He'd vanished, leaving her to face the ruin alone. She dragged herself to the kitchen, the sight of their wedding photo on the fridge stopping her cold. Jason's arm around her, both of them grinning at some beach they'd never visit again. She wanted to smash it, to erase the reminder, but she couldn't move. Instead, she made coffee, the routine a flimsy anchor. Her mind churned. How had Jason known? The photos, the dates, he'd been watching her, planning, while she'd been blind. The thought made her skin crawl, not because he'd caught her, but because she'd underestimated him. Her phone pinged, and her heart jumped, but it was just an email from work. A meeting reminder, as if her job mattered now. She opened her laptop, half hoping to find a message from Jason, an olive branch, anything. Instead, she saw a bank alert, account access restricted. Her breath caught. She logged in, her fingers clumsy, and stared at the screen. Their joint savings gone. The investment account, locked. Even their checking balance was a fraction of what it should be. A cold sweat broke over her. She called the bank, her voice shaking. There must be a mistake, she said, but the rep was calm, clinical. Your husband initiated a transfer yesterday. Everything's in order. Joan hung up, the room spinning. He hadn't just exposed her, he'd stripped her bare. No money, no explanation, just a calculated move to leave her with nothing. She sank to the floor, the coffee forgotten, her mind racing for a way out. Could she fight this? Hire a lawyer? But with what? She had her salary, but it wouldn't cover a legal battle, not against Jason. She tried Nate again, desperate for an ally. Voicemail. Coward, she muttered, tossing the phone. He'd been her escape, her thrill, but now he was a ghost, leaving her to drown in the mess they'd made. She thought of calling Jason, begging for a chance, but his words at the party echoed. I'm done. He'd meant it. She'd seen it in his eyes, cold, final, a wall she couldn't climb. Joan forced herself to stand, pacing the house like a caged animal. She needed a plan, something to salvage from this disaster. Her job, she could lean into it, ask for a raise, rebuild. But even as she thought it, the idea felt hollow. Work wouldn't fill the void Jason had left, wouldn't erase the shame of last night. She stopped at his office door, hesitating before stepping inside. His desk was tidy, blueprints stacked neatly, a pen resting where he'd left it. It was so him-ordered, deliberate. She hated it now, hated how it reminded her of his control. She sat in his chair, her eyes falling on a notepad. A single line in his handwriting. Call Sarah, finalize. It hit like a slap. He'd been planning this for days, maybe weeks, while she'd been playing her dangerous game. She tore the page off, crumpling it. But it didn't help. The truth was in every corner of this house, in every choice she'd made. She'd wanted more excitement, more attention, and now she had less than nothing. Across town, Jason sat by the lake, his phone off. He didn't want to hear from Joan, not yet. Sarah had everything under control, and Mark had promised to stop digging. There was nothing left to find. He thought of the party, Joan's tears, the way Nate had shrunk under his gaze. It should have felt good, but it didn't. It felt necessary, like cutting away a rotting beam to save a structure. He'd done what he had to, but the cost was a life he'd loved, even if it hadn't been real. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. The future was uncertain, but it was his now, no lies, no shadows. He'd rebuild, not for her, not for them, but for himself. As he walked back to his car, the city waking around him, he felt a spark of something new. Not hope, not yet, but possibility. Joan would face her reckoning, but his story wasn't over. It was just beginning.